Welcome to the Eclipse Committer Training video series. In these videos, we discuss certain key elements of life as a committer on an Eclipse project. In this video, we're going to talk about committer elections. For Eclipse projects, and the open source world in general, committers are the folks who have the real power. Committers decide what code goes into the code base. They decide how a project builds, and they ultimately decide what gets delivered to the adopter community. Committer elections are the means by which new committers are added to the project. Like every process that we have at the Eclipse Foundation, the committer election process has been defined, and tools have been created to support important underlying principles. The open source rules of engagement are the foundational principles that underpin how we believe that open source should be done. The Eclipse Foundation development process, and all Eclipse open source projects by extension, work on three principles described in the open source rules of engagement. Again, Eclipse open source projects must operate in an open, transparent, and meritocratic manner. All three of these rules come into play when we're talking about making somebody a committer. I'll discuss them in the opposite order. To be considered for committer status, a candidate must demonstrate merit. Generally, this takes the form of making high-quality contributions to a project in the form of patches or new code, but can manifest in other ways. It may make sense, for example, to nominate a committer based on a history of helping users and adopters. A candidate must demonstrate that they understand their responsibilities under the Eclipse Foundation development process, as well as how to work with the project team. The demonstration of merit must be something that everybody can see. That is, the demonstration of merit must be transparent to both the entire project team of existing committers and the general public. Again, code contributions are an obvious example of this, as the commit record is open for all. This is one of the reasons that commits must be correctly attributed. That is, the author field in a Git commit must include the author's name and credentials. Another reason is that implementing an effective intellectual property regime requires it. With the tools available today, it's pretty easy to point to a pattern of contribution. The entire process must be open to all comers. As I like to say, in one form or another, the playing field must be level. The means by which an Eclipse project team decides to make somebody a committer must not be biased because of who that individual works for, or any criteria other than the quality of the contributions they've made to the project, and their demonstration that they understand their role and responsibilities as a committer. As a committer, you have an obligation to review the contributions made by others and make a reasonable attempt to work with contributors to help them earn more responsibility in the project, and, ultimately, increase the diversity of interests within the project team. There are three stages to becoming an Eclipse committer. It all starts with contribution. To be a committer, one must first contribute to the project. After having established a pattern of contribution and making oneself known to the team, an existing committer will nominate a candidate and launch a committer election. Following a successful committer election, the successful candidate must engage with the Eclipse Foundation's records team to ensure the required agreements are in place. As a committer working with contributors, you may get asked about the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. The purpose of the Eclipse Contributor Agreement, or ECA, is to provide a written record that contributors have agreed to provide their contributions of code and documentation under the licenses used by the Eclipse projects they're contributing to. It also makes clear that contributors are promising that what they contribute to Eclipse is code that they wrote, and they have the necessary rights to contribute it to Eclipse projects. And, finally, it documents a commitment from the contributor that their open source contributions will be permanently on the public record. All contributors who are not committers on the Eclipse project must sign the ECA. Eclipse committers do not need to sign the ECA. Contributions received from Eclipse committers are covered by their committer agreement. That is, if you have either signed the individual committer agreement or are covered by a member committer and contributor agreement, you do not need an ECA. It's not wrong to sign the ECA if you're already covered by a committer agreement, it's just not necessary. The Eclipse Contributor Agreement wraps the Developer Certificate of Origin, or DCO. This is the same DCO that is used by the Linux Foundation and many others. By signing the ECA, a contributor is agreeing that all of their contributions are submitted under these terms. We sometimes get questions expressing confusion over the structure of the four terms. Note the use of the word "or" at the end of A and B, and the period after C. The first three terms are grouped by disjunction. Every contribution provided under the DCO aligns with at least one of these terms, and the final term applies in all cases. That is, when signing the agreement, one agrees to A or B or C, and D. C is recursive. A signed ECA is valid for 3 years. After 3 years, contributors are asked to re-sign the ECA. So, when is a contributor ready to become a committer? This varies by project and community, but we can provide some guidelines. Committer elections should be based on actual contribution to the project, not the potential for future contribution. It's about what the candidate has done, not what they may do. A nomination statement for a committer or project lead election should never cite that somebody has been hired or reassigned as criteria. Contributors should be nominated to join the project team based on their contributions to the specific project. It is generally inappropriate to nominate a committer for contributions that they've made to some other project. It may make sense in certain cases to nominate a committer for contributions made to a tightly coupled, related project. At least some form of visible public contribution is required. At least one contribution on a public channel must be cited in the nomination. All contributions in public channels are valid. Git commits, merge, and pull requests are obvious, but contributions may also be made on issues, in mailing lists, chats, and other discussion forums. The actual quantity of contributions required varies by project, and is, of course, subjective. The project team should, to the extent possible, document standards for what constitutes sufficient merit, and what channels they monitor. Contribution rules, including such things as a requirement that all contributions be accompanied by test coverage, may be useful in this regard. A large number of high-quality, small contributions may, in the aggregate, form a solid basis for nomination, as can a smaller number of high-quality, large contributions. As a rule of thumb, consider how much of a demonstration of contribution you would like to see from a contributor that you don't know or have never met before. That's how much of a demonstration you should provide for candidates that you do know. No matter how rigorously documented the project standard is, there will always be room for judgment. Git makes establishing a pattern of contribution easy. If somebody is ready to be a committer, they should be able to create merge or pull requests or participate in discussions on issues, mailing lists, chats, and other discussion forums. If a candidate is not prepared to engage with the project in this manner, they may not be ready to take on committer responsibility. If project committers get to the point where a particular contributor's merge and pull requests are regularly merged with limited discussion and no modification, it might be time to elect that contributor to be a committer. It's not just about Git. It's easy to think that the only contributions that matter are Git commits. Committers also participate in committer elections and in the decision-making process. Contributors contribute in other ways as well. They may contribute to discussion about your project or answer questions in your project's communication channels. These contributions can be cited in a committer nomination. Committer status is granted based on a record of contribution. When a project team decides to adopt an entire repository, that repository is a contribution. It would be no different conceptually than when the project team decides to merge a large pull request. When a project accepts a significant contribution, it is natural to make the developers who built that contribution committers at the same time, citing the contribution as the merit statement in the nomination. Accepting a significant contribution represents a burden/liability for the project. It is actually irresponsible to accept a significant contribution without requiring that an appropriate number of developers of the contribution also commit to joining the project to support it. The definition of significant is subjective. If you're not sure, check with your PMC. The Eclipse Foundation development process has no notion of committers with different roles or privileges. All committers have the same responsibility and privileges. It may be unnatural for a build engineer who is concerned with managing a Jenkins build to contribute content to a project via Git. Likewise, it may be difficult for a security expert who is concerned with creating security advisories and filling CVEs on behalf of the project team to contribute content in a public manner. A potential candidate in a specialty field may do the following: answer questions related to their specialty from developers via the project's open communication channels, conduct reviews of the project's current practices and engage in discussions, create merge and pull requests and issues for assessments related to their specialty and actively contribute to their resolution, or contribute to the development and integration of related tools through merge and pull requests, and participate in related discussions. Bear in mind that precedent serves as documentation. Every committer election becomes part of the public record. That record serves in part as a template for future elections. The records from every committer election serve as references for other contributors who are forging their own path to committer status. Be mindful of the privileges being granted. Committers get to nominate other committers and project leads, and vote in elections. They can push directly to project repositories, accept merge and pull requests, and more. These are awesome responsibilities that should not be granted lightly. The nomination of a new committer has to be weighed against the risk of granting committer privileges to somebody who you only know through the contribution. The committer team still needs confidence that the nominee knows how to operate as a committer and will work on the project in good faith. The team would, for example, have to have some confidence that the new committer won't mess with content they don't understand, won't violate the IP policy, will respect the open source rules of engagement, etc. Committer elections are the mechanism by which we turn a contributor into a committer. Any committer can start an election by visiting the project's page in the Project Management Interface, logging in, selecting Nominate a Committer, and following the workflow. Elections start with a nomination, and that requires a nomination statement, referred to as criteria on the nomination form. A committer nomination should explain the candidate's contributions to the project, and therefore why they should be elected as a committer. The nomination statement should cite the issues they have fixed via patches, cite the community forum postings they have answered, cite the dev list design discussions to which they have contributed, etc. In all cases, the nomination statement should include URLs to source material. Pointers to specific merge and pull requests are excellent in a merit statement. Vague pointers that require the reader to discover the candidate's contribution records for themselves are not helpful. Only project committers may nominate a new committer or vote in a committer election. To be successful, the election must receive a minimum of 3 positive +1 votes. Any committer can veto the election by casting a -1 vote, or indicate their participation in the process, but with no opinion, with a neutral 0 vote. For projects with 3 or fewer committers, all committers must vote in the affirmative. Committer elections run for 1 week, but will end immediately if all project committers vote +1. Following a successful committer vote, the project management committee for that project will review the election results, and then either approve or veto the election. An election may be vetoed, for example, if the PMC feels the merit statement is not strong enough. The paperwork process will automatically be initiated following PMC approval of an election. As a committer, you have an obligation to participate in committer elections. Even if you haven't worked with a candidate directly, you should be able to invest reasonable effort into reviewing the contributions cited in the nomination statement before casting your vote. The Eclipse Foundation needs to ensure that all committers with right access to the code, websites, and issue tracking systems understand their role in the intellectual property process. The Eclipse Foundation also needs to ensure we have accurate records of the people acting as change agents on the projects. To ensure that committers understand their role and that the Eclipse Foundation has accurate records, committers must provide documentation asserting they have read, understood, and will follow the committer guidelines. Committers must also gain their employer's consent to their participation in Eclipse Foundation open source projects. The committer questionnaire is accessible only after an individual has been elected into the role of a committer on a project. The EMO records team will send new committers a link to the questionnaire via email. Remind new committers to check their spam folder. Note that we are dependent on the new committer engaging in the process, and that the amount of time it takes for this part of the process to complete is largely dependent on their engagement. When an election completes successfully, the EMO records team will reach out to the new committer to ensure we have the necessary agreements in place. The specific agreements required depend on the nature of the project and the employment status of the individual. The Individual Committer Agreement, or ICA, is for committers whose employers are either not members of the Eclipse Foundation or are members that have not signed the Member Committer and Contributor Agreement, or MCCA. The MCCA is used by organizations that are members of the Eclipse Foundation to cover all their employees who participate in Eclipse Foundation open source projects as committers. Additional agreements may be required for committers who have been elected to specification projects. The EMO records team will work with the new committer to sort the required combination of agreements. Once the process is complete and the necessary agreements are in place, the committer will be officially designated. That is, they will appear in the committer list and are off to the races. Each piece takes time. If a committer doesn't appear within a day or two of the successful completion of a committer election, then contact the new committer to confirm they've followed the instructions provided by the EMO records team and have submitted committer paperwork. Very often, the problem is that the email that we've sent to the new committer has ended up in their spam folder. If your project uses GitHub, please be sure to encourage the candidate to provide their GitHub username in their Eclipse Foundation account. Our tools require this information to grant the necessary privileges to the new committer. So, that's it. It all starts with contribution. To be a committer, one must first contribute to the project. After having established a pattern of contribution and making oneself known to the team, an existing committer may choose to nominate a candidate, thereby launching a committer election. Following a successful committer election, the successful candidate must engage with the Eclipse Foundation's records team to ensure that the required agreements are in place.